The planet Virk 7 burned in silence beneath a sky split by streaks of orbital re-entry. Thunder rolled across the valleys a few seconds after the drop pods hit soil, smashing through jungle canopy and fungal towers. The invasion had begun. Sergeant Mason Cade's boots crunched the blackened ground as he led 2nd Platoon through the ash fields. His armor bore the chipped paint of 100 deployments, and across the helm and breastplate was the emblem he always carried, a human skull painted in white, jaws agape, crowned with a red mark across the brow. Behind him, his soldiers moved like ghosts through smoke, the power armor of the Terran 92nd Reclamation Division humming with kinetic tension. They made no noise, not a whisper or murmur. They had trained to move like hunters, not men. In the far tree line, 4 meters tall and gleaming with bioalloy, one of the Draxi observers watched them approach. His species were ancient warriors bred from war beasts, 6-limbed and scaled, with minds augmented by memory sharing and genetic prophecy. Lieutenant Krivex of the Draxi Vanguard stood motionless, his thermal optics tracing the Terrans as they advanced through the shattered remnants of a Zerathi outpost. He had heard stories of humans, the younger species, the opportunists from the backwater blue world, intriguing, yes, dangerous perhaps, but crude, primitive. Their tactics lacked elegance, their machines screamed rather than hummed, their biology was chaotic. Yet what unsettled him now was the paint. On every piece of armor the same symbol, a skull, sometimes drawn in careful detail, other times smeared like blood, each one different yet the same, and it wasn't just art, it was ritual, it was purpose. Krivex approached the line of Terrans cautiously. They didn't point weapons at him. They were here as allies, observers to a joint operation against the insectoid Zerathi swarms, but even so he moved slowly, deliberately. He knew better than to spook a predator he didn't understand. Sergeant Cade noticed him immediately and turned, lifting his helmet's visor. The face beneath was hard, sun-scarred and rough, but young, not even 40 cycles old, yet wearing the weight of a veteran. His eyes were pale, calm, the kind that had seen cities fall and didn't flinch anymore. Krivex's translator clicked as he spoke. "I have studied your combat doctrines. They are efficient for a species so recently emerged, but I have a question." Cade gave a slight nod. Krivex's crest fluttered. "Why do your warriors paint skulls on their armor? Is it meant to intimidate? A psychological weapon, perhaps? The Zerathi do not process fear." Cade took a step forward, his shadow long in the toxic light. "No," he said quietly, "it's not for them." The words hung heavy in the air. Krivex tilted his head. "Then for who?" Before Cade could answer, a shrieking alarm cut through the haze. The sky above them flashed with emerald fire. Plasma bolts arced from the horizon, incoming Zerathi artillery. Cade didn't flinch. He turned to his squad and barked the code. "Phantom line, form 0, smoke 10 seconds." The Terrans vanished into their formation like parts of a machine. They moved into staggered cover, laid down suppressive sonic bursts, and deployed subatomic mesh to confuse incoming scans. The jungle lit up with fire and static. Krivex moved as well, but he couldn't stop thinking about the skulls, and the way Cade had said those words. Not for them. The battle unfolded in spiraling waves. Zerathi tunnelers breached beneath the ruins, bursting through the earth in waves of chitin and acid. The 92nd fought back with brutal efficiency. Kinetic spikes tore through the swarm. Flamethrowers turned nests into glowing pits. Not one Terran fell. Krivex engaged with his own kind, blade arms cleaving through hive drones, his organic armor absorbing toxin and heat. But always out of the corner of his eye he watched the humans, watched how they moved, how they worked in silence, how they marked every confirmed kill by drawing tally lines on their forearms. At nightfall, the survivors regrouped, the area was secured, Draxi medics tended the wounded, human engineers set up perimeter defenses. Krivex approached Cade again, this time alone. "I still seek your answer," he said. "If not for the enemy, then for who?" Cade was sitting on a cargo crate, wiping grime off his helmet. The skull was still visible, sharp beneath the smears. He looked up slowly. "We paint the skulls," he said, "so we remember what we're walking toward. Every mission, every drop, that's the end. Death, not theirs, ours." Krivex's eyes narrowed. Cade continued, "It's a warning, not to them, to us, that if we forget what's waiting, we stop earning the right to come back. We paint the end on ourselves so we never lie to each other about where we're going." A long silence passed. The jungle hissed in the distance. Krivex took an involuntary step backward. There was no pride in Cade's voice, no threat, just clarity, cold and clear as vacuum. A Terran female passed by then, a demolitions tech. Her armor was marked with dozens of skulls, each with a different design. One had a crack across the brow. Another wore a crown of thorns. She nodded to Cade and moved on. Kryvek stared after her. "How many of you carry these skulls?" he asked. Cade shrugged. "All of us. Some earn more, some stop painting after a while, not because they forget, because they remember too well." He looked Kryvex in the eyes. "You asked if it's psychological warfare. It is, but not against the enemy, against fear, against hope, against anything that might slow your hand when your friend's bleeding out and you're the last one standing." Kryvex said nothing. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. "That is not the kind of war we were bred to understand." Cade's face remained unreadable. "That's why you keep losing." Far above them, the orbiting carrier Vindicator shimmered in low orbit, and a new wave of drop pods began descending. A second front was opening to the east. The humans began moving again, silent and focused, the paint on their armor still wet in places. Kryvex remained where he was, for the first time in years unsure of his place on the battlefield. The second front detonated across the Altari Ridge before midnight. Zarathi artillery, adjusted from earlier engagements, rained down in coordinated swarms of plasma spores and corrosive silicates. The terrain itself began to liquefy as burrowers ruptured substructure caverns, sending molten earth cascading through the ridgeline. The 92nd dropped into the chaos without hesitation. Sergeant Cade led a spearhead unit through the fractured rockscape, his HUD flickering with threat designations and biohazard alerts. Around him, the terrain cracked under footfalls as the temperature spiked past survivable levels. Their suits held, barely. Above the horizon, the Draxi air elements faltered. Organic flyers twisted in confusion as Zarathi sensory pulses hijacked their nervous systems. Kryvex, still deployed among Terran command, watched in horror as entire Draxi squadrons fell from the sky like broken wings. Humans adapted. He watched them abandon compromised positions and reorient instantly. Drones were deployed to map new vectors in real time. They advanced not through doctrine but through response, through instinct honed by desperation. He followed them again. A fire team from the 92nd, Callsign Ember Echo, breached a tunnel system too small for any Draxi to enter. Kryvex paced the surface like a restless animal, forced into observer status, until Cade's voice crackled across a shared channel. "You want to understand," Cade said, "then come see what it costs." Kryvex didn't hesitate. He jettisoned outer armor layers, reduced his size, and crawled in. The tunnel stank of death, the walls pulsed with Zarathi tissue. Human lights blinked in the dark, red, low spectrum, designed not to trigger defensive bioluminescence. Inside, the fighting had shifted. It wasn't war now, it was survival. A Zarathi Queen drone had birthed a new clutch. The area was flooded with thousands of larval soldiers, unformed but lethal in instinct. Ember Echo held them off with chemical grenades and plasma ropes, forming fire barriers where bullets failed. Kryvex dropped beside Cade in the heart of the nest. The human's armor was scorched, his shoulder cracked, one eye flickering behind shattered glass. And still painted on his chest that same skull, unbroken. Kryvex lifted his blade arm. "You lead a doomed assault, there are too many." Cade was reloading. "Yeah, you persist. That's the job." Kryvex took a step closer. "Then why do your people smile when they fall?" Cade paused just for a moment. "We don't smile because we die," he said. "We smile because they didn't stop us before we did what we came to do." Then he motioned forward. Ember Echo charged, blasting through the brood chamber in coordinated arcs. Cade lobbed an arc flare. The chemical compound ignited, consuming the clutch in seconds. The tunnel collapsed behind them. By the time they emerged, Cade was dragging one of his wounded, Corporal Zhao, with blood leaking from his suit and a jaw torn open. Kryvex stared. "You risked your life for a broken soldier." "Yeah," Cade said, panting, "because next time he'll do the same." Kryvex opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the Terran's faceplate again, now cracked, and at the skull still visible beneath the damage. They were not the strongest, they were not the most advanced, but they were something far more difficult to fight. Unyielding. That night under flickering field lights, Kryvex sat near the human encampment, refusing his species' recovery tents. He stared at his own armor, unpainted, ceremonial, immaculate. He felt it now, the weight of being unmarked, of fighting without memory. Across from him, a young human, a private barely out of Earth's orbit, was painting something onto his shoulder pauldron. His hand shook, but the brush strokes were careful, deliberate. Krivex watched the skull take form. "Why do you do it?" Krivex asked him. The boy looked up, nervous but honest. "My brother wore one, he never came back, so I wear mine too."
Is it his face?
"No, it's mine, or it will be." Krivex rose slowly and walked into the jungle. He had seen many things in his centuries, watched empires rise and fall, but never had he seen a species that wore its own death as a badge of honor, not for glory, not for intimidation, but to remember. The next morning, a new directive arrived from Fleet Command. The Zarathi hive clusters had merged with an older strain dormant for millennia, a convergence not seen in any war record. Entire biocontinents were activating. The campaign was escalating, a full war front was now declared.
Draxi forces hesitated.
Terran forces requested immediate redeployment. Krivex reviewed the orders. His species had protocols for this. Long-term war required ritual, meditation, ancestral approval, but the humans were already packing, loading new ordnance, patching armor with field welds and half-muttered prayers. Sergeant Cade stood at the edge of the landing zone, arm in a sling, directing supply rotations. His cracked helmet had been repaired, and beneath the repair patch, the skull had been repainted. This time with a crack through the left eye. Krivex approached. He had no translator on. He didn't need one anymore. He looked at Cade, then slowly, deliberately, he held out his own forearm.
Cade blinked.
Krivex unsheathed a stylus from his vambrace, dipped it in Terran marking paint, handed it to the human.
"Do it," Krivex said.
Cade raised an eyebrow. Krivex nodded, "Draw one." Cade stared at him a long moment, then without a word he painted. A skull, fangs elongated, eyes slitted like a Draxi's, but human in structure. When he finished, Krivex looked down at the mark. His breathing slowed. He felt it somehow, the weight, the purpose. "You're not afraid of dying," Krivex said. "No," Cade answered, "we're afraid of forgetting why we lived." Above them, the dropship screamed to life. Fire lit the jungle. The sky turned black with contrails. War called again. And now Krivex would follow. The new front opened on Karin's wound, a tectonic scar stretching 2,000 kilometers across the planet's northern hemisphere. It was not terrain built for warfare. The winds screamed through canyons at hypersonic speeds. Electromagnetic storms boiled in the upper atmosphere, searing holes in orbital scans and frying any drone foolish enough to linger. The Zarathi had nested here because no other species would dare follow.
But the Terrans did.
The 92nd Reclamation Division landed without ceremony. There were no declarations, no banners, just armor slamming into rock, boots crunching on shale, and weapons primed mid-stride. They brought climbing gear, seismic drills, and chemical warheads shaped for subterranean collapse. The humans weren't planning to fight above ground, they were going straight into the wound.
Krivex descended with them.
The mark on his arm had not faded. The skull glared back at him every time he moved. Other Draxi officers had questioned it. Some openly challenged him, but none dared to interfere when they saw him walk beside the Terrans, not behind. Deep in the fault, Zarathi activity spiked. New morphs emerged, taller, plated in obsidian armor grown from volcanic minerals, their bodies adapted to the tectonic pressure. They struck like earthquakes, each one a mobile disaster. Ember Echo lost 2 men that first night. Krivex stood vigil beside the bodies as Cade sat down with the others, unsealing a pack of ancient earth cards. They didn't speak. They didn't mourn aloud, but each one took a brush and added to the dead men's armor. A final skull, one for the record, one so their deaths wouldn't fade into radio static and empty rosters. Krivex finally understood. Not ritual, not superstition. Memory weaponized. As the campaign continued, Cade's platoon found something buried beneath the old strata, a structure not made by the Zarathi. Stone, metallic composites, glyphs older than any known civilization. A vault.
They forced entry.
Inside, the air was still, the walls pulsed with a kind of hibernating life, and in the center, a sealed chamber of living amber. A creature rested within, humanoid, skeletal, eyes closed, wrapped in bronze filaments that seemed to pulse with ancient energy. Krivex stepped forward, stunned. "This is not Zarathi." "No," Cade said, eyes narrowed. "It's something older, maybe something they serve." The humans didn't attempt to wake it. They mined the data, mapped the walls, then resealed the chamber. Cade left a beacon, not a warning, but a marker. A note for whoever came next, do not wake what forgets itself. Later that night, Krivex confronted him. You find a being older than your civilization, you walk into its tomb, and you leave it behind. Why? Cade stared at the jungle of stars above the fissure. Because I don't need to know who it was, I need to know who we are. Krivex said nothing for a long time, then he looked again at the skull painted across Cade's new shoulder plate. Your species is building something, isn't it, not just victories? Cade turned toward him, half smiling. We're building a memory that can't be buried, so when they try to wipe us out, there'll be something left to scare them in the dark. For days, the campaign pressed deeper. The Zarathi began evolving faster, as if reacting to Terran tactics. New drones bore mimicry of Terran forms, not full, twisted, wrong like memories passed through too many filters. When the first mimic dragged itself into a human trench and whispered, "I remember you," before exploding in a burst of antineural gas, the 90 seconds stopped sleeping altogether. They responded in kind. A new unit, Ghost Fangs, was deployed. Their gear was unmarked by rank, only skulls. Each armor was blacked out, silent, carrying the names of the dead etched inside. They operated behind swarm lines, recovering intelligence, sabotaging hive clusters, and returning with fewer every time. Krivex watched them return after a 5-day Black Zone infiltration. Only 2 walked out. One carried the other's corpse, neither spoke. The survivor repainted both their helmets that night. The next morning, Krivex painted another skull on his arm, not for himself, for the Draxai who had fallen under his command the day before, too disfigured to identify. Cade watched him quietly. They wouldn't have done the same for me, Krivex said. No, Cade replied, but that's how it starts. By the 4th week, the fissure front was collapsing. Zarathi massed for one last push, a swarm count higher than any prior record. Terran reinforcements were 5 days out. They wouldn't make it in time. Command advised withdrawal. Draxai fleet units pulled back to high orbit.
Cade refused.
We hold, he said over open channel, not because we'll win, but because we'll be remembered holding.
Krivex made his choice.
He issued a Draxai override, ancient authority, rarely used, and ordered his remaining units to return. Not to orbit, to the front. What are you doing? Asked one of his own kind, aghast. This isn't our war. Krivex responded with a voice cold as metal. It is now. They fortified a dead canyon surrounded by obsidian and bone. Ammo was low, shields down to single-use charges. The 90-second mounted skulls on pikes around the trench, not human, not Draxai, Zarathi.
Cade stood at the center, motionless.
Krivex joined him. You really think we survive this? He asked.
Cade's voice was quiet, steady.
No, but someone will, and when they see what we did, maybe they'll stop underestimating what memory can do. When the swarm hit, it was not a battle. It was annihilation, slowed only by resolve. Wave after wave broke against the line. Humans and Draxai fought together, shoulder to shoulder. Pulsefire ripped the air. Krivex's blades glowed molten red. Cade, his arm now hanging useless, kept firing with the other. And when the final defensive line collapsed, Cade activated the last seismic charge beneath their position.
Not a retreat.
A burial. The canyon swallowed them whole. The canyon lay silent for 3 days. Orbit scans showed nothing but slag and tectonic debris. Draxai High Command assumed total loss. Fleet archivists began recording the Karen's wound operation as a valiant but failed holding action. No requests for honors, no funeral rites, just a name on a ledger and a timestamp on a dead transmission. Then a weak signal cracked through the storm. Not from orbit, not from command.
It came from the base of the wound. Encrypted in Terran cipher. Repeating,
"We're not done." The message pulsed on loop every 17 seconds. The Draxai fleet was stunned. Earth's own commanders dismissed it as atmospheric ghosting, a misfire, an echo.
But then came the image.
Low resolution, blurred. A Terran figure standing atop broken rock, black smoke swirling around them, helmet off, blood on their face. Behind them, a makeshift banner stabbed into the ground, a metal rod with a single object hanging from it, a cracked helmet with a painted skull.
Cade.
Alive. And beside him, limping, armor cracked and leaking coolant, was Krivex. Terran orbital relays scrambled to verify. Signal triangulation confirmed it. Deep beneath the canyon floor, an improvised survival shelter had been dug using down excavation drills. Krivex had kept Cade alive for 2 days using Draxi emergency medkits and raw instinct. When power failed, they activated the fallback transmitter built into Cade's shoulder blade, an old Earth trick meant for last stands. The survivors, 17 in total, 12 human, 5 Draxi, had held out in a heat-scarred cavern beneath the epicenter. Their supplies were gone, oxygen levels critical, but they were alive. And they had done more than survive. They'd mapped an underground network of tunnels stretching beyond Karin's wound, ancient, geometrically impossible passages, pre-Zerathi, far beneath the battlefield. Something had been watching the war, observing, recording. And now it was waking up. When the recovery teams arrived, they found not just Cade and Krivex but a data core salvaged from beneath the alien vault. It wasn't just storage, it was language, a code unlike anything in Draxi or Terran knowledge. A message, a warning. But it was incomplete, fractured. And Cade refused to hand it over to command. He stood before the extraction shuttle, bandaged and bleeding, armor in pieces, but eyes clear. "Not until we understand what it is," he said. "Not until we know who left it and why the Zerathi built their nests around it." Krivex stood with him. Fleet command bristled, orders were issued, rank invoked. Cade didn't move. "You sent us here to die," he said calmly. "We didn't, so now we decide how this ends." A standoff followed, not with weapons but with memory. The stories of Karin's wound began leaking through unofficial channels. Footage, testimonies, the dead listed by name, the painted skulls, Krivex's defection, the ghost fangs, blackened returns, images spread faster than orders. On Earth, people took notice. In the Draxi homeworlds, dissident warriors began painting their own arms. The symbol spread. And then something stranger happened. The Zerathi stopped attacking. Across multiple fronts they fell silent, not retreating, not defeated, simply still, as if waiting. Terran strategists were baffled. Krivex was. "They're afraid," he said. "Of what?" Cade asked. Krivex flexed his marked arm. "Of what remembers." The data recovered from the vault spoke of a cycle, not just war but erasure, a pattern stretching back eons, civilizations rising, resisting, and being forgotten. Only species that etched themselves into the bones of history endured. The skull was not a symbol of death. It was defiance. A message to time itself: we were here, we fought, and we will not be erased. When Cade returned to Earth, he was met not with fanfare but silence. The kind of silence held for ghosts and revenants. He spoke not to governments but to soldiers, to engineers, to miners, people who knew what it meant to be buried and still dig their way out. He told them what they'd found. He showed them the skull. By the end of the year, the mark had spread across regiments, not by order, by choice. The Terran military changed. No more pristine armor, no more nameless deployments. Each unit painted their own. Each mission was recorded by those who lived it. And across the stars, others took notice. The Silaran Consortium, long neutral, began inquiries into Terran tactics. The Kraveth Archants, disdainful before, now sent observers to Earth itself. A galactic shift had begun, not from conquest. From memory. Because the Terrans had survived something they weren't meant to, and they had left a mark that couldn't be wiped clean. On a cliff overlooking Karin's wound, years later, a monument was erected. Not a statue, not a flag. Just a wall, covered in painted skulls. Each one different. Each one remembered. Krivex visited it on the last day of his service. He stood alone. His own armor now bore dozens, one for every name. He placed his hand on the wall. And he whispered something in his native tongue, something old and near forgotten. "May our end be remembered." Then he turned. And behind him the stars waited. In the deep black between galaxies, where even starlight thins to a whisper, something stirred. The signal unearthed beneath Karin's wound had not gone silent. Its fragments reconstructed, analyzed, debated, formed a lattice of data whose architecture bent logic. It wasn't a warning in the traditional sense, it was a design, a blueprint for memory encoded across physics itself, interwoven with gravitational harmonics and quantum decay. The implication shattered everything. Some intelligence had tried long ago to defy extinction not with weapons but with memory as structure. They had failed. The Zerathi had been the instrument. Not creators, jailers.
custodians of forgetfulness. That revelation changed the war. The Zerathi were no longer seen as a swarm, they were a system, an engine of silence. Any race that resisted, that evolved beyond its cradle too fast, too recklessly, became a target, not for conquest. For erasure. Humanity had not been meant to make it this far. But they had. And the skulls they wore, they weren't just tradition now. They were interference. Each mark painted, each death remembered, distorted the erasure field, made the Terrans harder to delete, harder to overwrite. They had unknowingly weaponized remembrance against an enemy built from oblivion. High Command resisted the idea at first. The concept of war fought through meaning, of battles waged not only with kinetics and energy but with identity, but Cade had lived it, Krivex had seen it. And when data from forgotten colonies, wiped from maps centuries ago, began to bleed back into existence, ghost signals writing Terran memorial transmissions, even the skeptics fell quiet. The war escalated. The 92nd Reclamation Division was reformed into a new branch, the Mnemonic Vanguard. Their role was no longer just to fight. It was to anchor. Every planet they liberated, every void station they reclaimed, they didn't just secure it with weapons. They carved memory into the stone, skulls etched into walls, names burned into orbital code, survivor testaments uploaded to galactic relays. Resistance became permanence. Other species began to follow. The Draxi repainted their ancestral banners, once blank and ceremonial, now blazing with hybrid symbols, Terran skulls fused with claw marks and blade crests. The Siluran modified their song archives to include human phonemes, embedding meaning that could not be erased by harmonic distortion. Across the galaxy, memory became rebellion. Cade remained at the center of it. His body was breaking down, nerve damage from plasma exposure, old bone fractures never healed, but he refused medical extraction. He refused command. He served. When he finally spoke before the newly formed Galactic Coalition, it was not with fanfare. It was in a darkened chamber beneath a dome of silence, where each species sent only one voice. They asked him what made humans immune. He said nothing at first. Then he lifted his helmet and showed them the skull. Not painted, carved through the ceramic. The bone beneath it gleamed where his skin had once been, a wound he'd kept open, a mark not of war but of witness. "We don't fight to win," he said. "We fight so the universe can't forget we fought." The room held its breath. Krivex stood at his side, armor covered now in more marks than plates. "Your kind," one of the elders whispered, "is becoming myth." Cade looked up, eyes shadowed by pain and fire. "No," he said, "we're becoming a warning." That same year, the Zorathi vanished. No battles, no retreats, they simply ceased. Where their hives had once been, only hollowed silence remained, as if even the space they'd occupied had been wiped. It wasn't peace. It was recoil. Humanity had done what none had before. They'd broken the cycle of erasure, and in doing so, they had awoken something older still. Deep within the Uit Veil, beyond the touch of dark matter sensors, an object turned. It had not moved in eons. It had not needed to. Until now. It began transmitting in the same frequency discovered on Karin's wound, a language of recursion, reflection, and resilience. The humans listened. And for the first time, something answered. Not with a threat, but with a question. Who remembers you? The mnemonic Vanguard responded as one, transmitting a pulse of memory data. Names, images, voices, songs, the echo of sacrifice. Across the stars, the reply came. Then you are not forgotten. The Terrans had not just survived. They had changed the nature of survival itself. From that day, every new expedition, every planetary charter, every ship hull bore the same mark, painted, carved, engraved in metal or ink or bone. A skull, not as a symbol of death, but of remembrance. On Earth, children learned to paint them before they learned to write. In the Draxi temples, they were etched beside the names of war beasts and honored ancestors. Even the silent stars, in their own cold way, bore witness. At the edge of the Perseid abyss, where light faltered and time wore thin, a monument was raised, not to a species or a victory, but to a truth. Beneath the monument was a single inscription. We do not forget. We do not fade. We paint our end, and in doing so, we remain.